video, I'll talk about a recent paper of mine that's called Research Dilemmas with Behavioral Big Data. So what is behavioral big data? You've probably heard of big data. Here we're talking about a special kind of very large and rich data set that measures human behaviors and social interactions. This is different from inanimate big data, where we're measuring things about objects, in that the objects that we're talking about are actually people and communities. And that makes an additional piece that is the human subjects. Then you might think this is actually similar to physical or medical big data, where we're talking about people. But behavioral big data is a little bit different. We're not measuring something about the body. We're not measuring anything like your blood pressure or even your sleep patterns. We're talking about your actual behavior, although things are a little bit blurred. Behavioral big data is now the biggest opportunity for behavioral researchers who want to learn about human behaviors, about social behaviors. But this whole new rich type of data is also causing a lot of challenges. If you think about the four components of research, you have the researcher, you have the research question, you have the data, and you have, in this case, the human subjects. What's new for behavioral researchers when they move to behavioral big data is that the relationships between these four components become very different, giving you both new opportunities, but also setting new challenges. So for example, between the researcher and the research question, we have two new things. First of all, we can ask old research questions with completely new types of data and completely new types of measurements. We can also start asking completely new research questions that maybe arise from the new kinds of technologies that we now even can observe types of behaviors that we could not observe before. In terms of the relationship between the research and the researcher, this also creates challenges in terms of relationships between industry and academia. Whereas the goal of a researcher is to derive new scientific insights, in industry, really the main goal is to improve profits or improve a service or a product. And that will create some issues when we're collaborating across these two areas. That also creates some ethical issues. The ethical issues start coming in when we think about the new distance between the researcher and the human subjects. Whereas earlier on, researchers would be in much closer proximity to their human subjects, right now, these huge online surveys, online experimental platforms, and observational data from any kind of social networking sites creates an enormous distance where the researcher no longer feels or sees or knows their subjects. And in that sense, a lot of the issues and risks and harms that ethics boards used to protect against are no longer really there, which causes a lot of new important questions. It's also interesting to notice that the companies themselves are not regulated like the researchers are, which is creating a whole lot of friction and problems and challenges in the collaborations and in the whole scientific publication cycle. Another type of challenge arises when we look at the two components of the data and the researcher. Behavioral researchers don't typically have a background in computing or using very heavily and advanced databases. So anything from storing, transferring securely data, or even loading large and rich behavioral data into statistical software doesn't really work the way they expect it to, which means those are challenges. Methodological issues, such as using statistical methods that don't scale up, hitting problems like p-values that are meaningless, multiple testing, having now samples of subjects that maybe don't represent populations that we can even identify are another big problem that is happening in this whole world. And then, of course, we have problems of the data being contaminated by the company's own algorithms. So since the companies themselves are continuously doing experimentation and running all kinds of promotions, we never have clean data where we can actually study our subjects in a clean environment. The interactions and the networking between human subjects through social media and whatever cause all kinds of problems that used to be small to be big. Anything from spillover effects. People are in a treatment group and actually the treatment spills over into the control group. All those are issues that were there before, but now become very magnified. So you can read more about all these different challenges in the paper that I mentioned earlier on, published in the journal Big Data.